But today's going to be interesting things hidden discussion. We're going to look at what I consider to be perhaps a modern day scapegoating story, an event that has defined the modern framework of politics in America. We have with us Geoff Shepard. He was a domestic counsel lawyer for President Nixon's White House staff. He also was the deputy counsel for Nixon's Watergate defense team. And he has a new book out called The Nixon Conspiracy, which continues to develop his firsthand account of what happened in that era-defining scandal. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on. So typically what my show does is we look at history and anthropology, and we look for patterns of these scapegoats that we see in history, and we look into perhaps they got a bad deal. And it looks like you've done this in your own firsthand experience with the Nixon administration.
Well, yes, I think you could say that I believe that President Nixon was driven from office by a secret cabal of special prosecutors, judges, and congressional staff working together in secret to avoid his 1972 reelection.
And why would they do that?
Well, it was a different era, but it had many of the characteristics of today. Richard Nixon had a very, very successful first term, and he ran against a progressive, George McGovern, in 1972, and he walloped him. We characterized McGovern's campaign as acid, amnesty, and abortion. And he promised to raise taxes. And he was completely repudiated at the polls. Nixon won every single state except Massachusetts in the district. And the Democrats were set back on their hind legs and had to take Nixon out. I mean, we didn't use terms like we do today of deep state or fake news or biased prosecutors or narrative, but that's what was going on. If you think about it, the Democrats had been in charge of the nation's capital since 1932, since the beginning of the Great Depression. And the only person that interfered with that was Dick Nixon. Now, Eisenhower was a Republican president, but he was a war hero. He could have won on either side. It was his vice president, Richard Nixon, who epitomized what the left feared. And he just won this massive reelection, and he had a problem. The problem was Watergate, and they very, very successfully fanned that problem into a situation where he resigned in disgrace, and 20 members of his administration went to jail. Now, I was on the team, as you mentioned. I was on the defense team. It ended badly, and I've pondered ever since, what on earth went wrong? Why did this happen? Could we have done things differently? And what's happened recently is within the past 8 years, 4 batches of documents have surfaced from the special prosecution staff. Several of their top prosecutors took their records with them when they left office. And there was this secret report titled The Roadmap, which took the grand jury evidence they had gathered to prosecute people and turned it over to the House Judiciary Committee to be used for Nixon's impeachment. And that was sealed, but it was unsealed by order of the court in 2018. So you have these 4 batches of documents that undermine everything we've been told about Watergate. And that's what's so intriguing. That's what I talk about. It's what I write about, and what I'm pleased to be on your show to explain.
So why was it sealed till 2018, those documents?
Well, grand jury evidence is supposed to be secret forever. And this will take a minute, but this is intriguing. The grand jury operates something like a star chamber. You don't get a lawyer. You don't get to put on evidence or witnesses. You don't get to cross-examine witnesses who have testified against you. It's all done in secret, and you have no rights whatsoever. Well, you can take the Fifth Amendment, but other than that, you have nothing going for you.
Mm-hmm.
But and therefore they gather what is unchallenged hearsay. You might say garbage. It may be true or not true, but it's not subject to cross-examination. But if you go to use that evidence in court, then the burden shifts, and the defendant gets all of the rights enumerated in the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. You get to put on witnesses of your own. You get to cross-examine their witnesses. It's got to be done in open court. They got to put on their case first before you're even required to put on yours. So you know what the charges are. You know what's going on. Well, what they did in Watergate, they said, look, this is secret grand jury evidence gathered to prosecute. We're going to share it with the Hill, but we're going to keep it secret. Now, I can't tell you how they came up with that, but that's what they did. And it stayed secret. It was available only to the House Judiciary Committee until it was unsealed, as I say, in 2018, in response to my court petition. I petitioned the court and said, look, this is crazy. We've never known what the specific charges are that will level against Richard Nixon. Not what the grand jury was told, because that was done in secret, and not what the House Judiciary Committee was told, because that stayed sealed. And in 2018, that's just yesterday, we could learn for the first time what the charges were. And amazingly, they were very specific, and they are easily refuted. Now, in that era, this is 50 years ago, David, it was generally believed that if you were going to void an election, if you're going to kick a president out of office, you had to get him cold, committing a crime, the equivalent of treason or bribery that was named in the Constitution. Now, I understand that you can get professors today to say, no, it's a political act. It's whatever impeachment offenses or whatever the Congress says it is. But back then, there hadn't been an impeachment for 100 years. And Nixon had been reelected by this great landslide. So the theory was, you better find him personally involved in a significant crime. None of this namby-pamby stuff like conspiracy. And the special prosecutor said, we got it. We got it. We understand, and we can prove that Richard Nixon personally approved the payment of blackmail to one of the Watergate burglars. And we can even tell you when it happened. It happened on the afternoon of Wednesday, March 21st, 1973. And this is, to your listeners who studied Watergate, this is the date that John Dean, who's the president's lawyer, who's been running the cover-up, he goes in and tells the president that there's a cancer on the presidency. It's growing, it's mutating, it's getting worse, and you're going to have to make some decisions, and you don't know what's been going on. But people are perjuring themselves, it's going to get worse, and oh, by the way, we're being blackmailed. And he tells them that Howard Hunt, who's one of the significant Watergate masterminds, he's going to be sentenced in 2 days, March 23rd, and they're going to throw the book at him. He's going to be led away to jail. And he owes $75,000 worth of legal fees. And he's got to take care of his family, even though he's in jail. So he wants another $50,000 on top of that in anticipation of going to jail. That's not paying legal fees. That's just out and out blackmail. So the meeting goes on for an hour and a half, and Nixon toys with what to do, and they batter it back and forth. And it's not a noble conversation because Nixon toys with the idea of paying the money to buy time to get out in front of the story. I think a fair reading of the tape is he realizes the truth is going to come out. It's the question of how they handle it, how they respond. They don't make a decision in that meeting. We've got the tape. It's very relatively clear tape. They dance about it. Nixon says, how much do you think it would take if we started paying? And Dean says, maybe $1 million. Nixon says, we could get the $1 million. But the difficulty they have, and again, a fair listening to the tape, once you start paying blackmail, there's no way out. So the decision at that meeting is, let's get John Mitchell, who's the president's former attorney general and head of his campaign. Let's get him down here from New York and decide what to do. So go get a hold of him and bring him down. So Haldeman, the president's chief of staff, calls Mitchell, and they agree Mitchell will come down the next day. But what the prosecutors stumbled upon and got them very, very excited was that Wednesday night, that very night at 10 p.m., $75,000 was paid to Howard Hunt's lawyer. Mm. So you had a very, very strong circumstantial case. President learns of the blackmail demand in a meeting ending at noon. 10 hours later, part of that demand is met. He wanted 120, he got paid 75. Well, the prosecutor said, well, clearly what must have happened is after Dean tells Nixon about the demand, Nixon must have told Haldeman to call Mitchell and tell Mitchell to meet the demand. Mitchell must have called LaRue, because Fred LaRue, who turns out to be the paymaster for these payments, he paid him that very night. Now, no one has testified to that then or now. No one has said, yes, that's what Nixon did. But the prosecutor said, we don't need that. They'd lie anyway. We've got this A to B, B to C, C to D, and the payoff. Now, that's what they put in their roadmap. And that's what they put in a follow-up memo that laid it out even more clearly, that they secretly shared with the House Judiciary Committee. But the problem, David, and we didn't know this, see, we didn't know they accused Nixon of having done that. We had the tape of the meeting. But we were all prepared to say, well, what happened after that? But they were saying in secret, no, he must have approved it, directed it. Well, that would be a chain of events, and it all had to occur in that 10-hour period, and they had a problem. They couldn't prove that Mitchell talked to LaRue in the afternoon. Both remembered the phone call. Both agreed on the content of the phone call, but there was no long distance charge. There was no notation. There was nothing to show that the call occurred in the afternoon. Now, this is significant because LaRue learned from John Dean of the blackmail demand that morning. So there was a possibility that when John Dean went off to tell the president, LaRue called Mitchell. And if that had happened, Nixon wouldn't have been in the chain of events. If LaRue talked to Mitchell before Nixon even knew of the demand, Nixon couldn't have approved. What the prosecutors did, because they didn't have this fact, is they faked it. They just fudged it up so nobody would know. It was secret anyway, so nobody knew. And we go forward. The grand jury names Nixon a co-conspirator. The House Judiciary Committee urges his impeachment on the basis of this representation that it must have been Dean told Nixon, Nixon told Mitchell, Mitchell told LaRue, LaRue made the payment. There are three problems with this, and I'm hurrying up toward the end, but this is significant. This is my life. First, if the prosecutor's process held, then Mitchell should have called LaRue to tell him about the demand. But it's agreed LaRue called Mitchell. LaRue already knew about the demand. And LaRue explained the demand to Mitchell, not the other way around. And LaRue took it upon himself to reduce the amount to be paid to Hunt from his requested 120 to just legal fees. $75,000. Now, if Nixon had said pay the guy, LaRue would never have reduced the amount paid to him. Most importantly, LaRue testified at the later cover-up trial. Now, remember, Nixon resigns on August 9th. He's pardoned a month later by Jerry Ford. And then in October, the 3-month cover-up trial begins. Nixon's left office. LaRue testifies under oath at that trial, and he says, to the best of his recollection, the phone call was in the morning. Now, this is devastating to the story the prosecutors told in secret to the grand jury and to the House Judiciary Committee, but we didn't know it. So it just kind of floats away, and nobody goes back and says, well, shoot, this means you guys misrepresented allegations of criminal activity on behalf of the president that it turns out you can't prove, but you did it in secret. And that only became knowable after 2018, when the roadmap was unsealed. So I'm here, bitter of having lost 50 years ago. I stumble across these 3 other batches of documents, internal documents from the special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, the second special prosecutor. He took his papers with him back to Texas, and they didn't surface until they showed up at his law school in 2013. And the archives retrieved them and brought them up. But I was the first person to see them. And James Vorenberg, the associate special prosecutor, took his papers back to Harvard, where he was a professor. And then the counsel to the special prosecutor, Phil Lacavara, he gave his papers that he had taken, boxes of papers, to the archives in 2020. And in each of these instances, I was the first one to see these papers and to analyze them. And David, they tell a very, very troublesome story. There were secret meetings between the prosecutors and the Watergate trial judges. Now, you don't have to have gone to law school to know that doesn't sound very fair.
Right.
And at least what we like to believe, that the American public believes, we talk about the rule of law and we talk about fair trials. We like to believe the American public would agree that no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how despicable the defendants, they get a fair trial. Then you hang them, but they get a fair trial in the first place. But these gentlemen, the Nixon's assistants, Nixon's senior aides, don't appear to have gotten a fair trial. I can show you indications of at least 10 meetings, secret meetings that the prosecutors had with Judge Sirica. In 4 of them, Leon Jaworski wrote descriptions of what they were talking about and what they agreed to. So you can't say there weren't any meetings. We've got Jaworski's own memos describing them.
Why would he put memos down about them if he knew they would be bad?
Well, David, what an excellent question. Why would he have done this? And I've pondered that ever since I got a hold of his files 8 years ago. And I've come up with 4 different answers, but there's no, Jaworski's dead. We don't know. One, you have to remember that Leon Jaworski was hired after Archibald Cox was fired. So the staff of the Special Prosecution Force was already hired. They called themselves Cox's Army. It was a specially selected group of people who didn't particularly like Nixon. They labeled their telephone directory the best, the brightest. These were all Ivy League guys and women out to get Nixon. Jaworski parachutes in the middle of the battlefield, and he's distrusted by both sides. We didn't like him anyway, but we had to have a new prosecutor. But this Ivy League group of people who were really upset Cox had been fired, they didn't trust Jaworski either. He'd been selected by Al Haig. He didn't go to an Ivy League school. He went to Baylor, which is down in Waco, Texas. This is not an elitist at all. And he asked questions about what they were doing and why they were doing certain things. And there was huge distrust. So one, it's possible that Jaworski was trying to keep his own record of what was going on. Second, the judge, the chief judge, John Sirica, keeps calling him over for secret meetings because it's clear in his memos, at least from Jaworski's point of view, these meetings occurred at Sirica's request. And he knows they're wrong. And this is a supposition on my part, but they're wrong. But you can't very well tell the chief judge, I don't want to come, you know. So he was taking contemporaneous notes to protect himself in case this blew up in his face. So several of these memos start out by saying, I was with Sirica as we sat alone in the jury room at his request. Or when 4 of the top prosecutors went down to meet with Sirica, it's at his request. The third possibility, and this gets way off in the stratosphere, is it's possible Jaworski knew this whole thing was wrong. He didn't stick around. I mean, he engineered Nixon's departure, and then I think he happened to concur in the pardon because he thought we needed to get this behind us. But he didn't stick around for the cover-up trial. He went back to Texas. And it could be he didn't want to touch it, that he knew it wasn't going to be a fair trial. He didn't want to be associated with it, but didn't want that to be known right away because the upset of the public was so massive. And he really wanted this to come out later. And the fourth thing is he forgot it was in the files, and he got old and didn't go through his files. And there these things were. Now, just, and I don't mean to take all this time on this, but I ponder this all the time. In that era, you would bring your secretary in and she would take dictation. And there were different sorts of shorthand, but you dictate a memo. She would type it double-spaced rough draft. You'd correct it, and then she'd type final. And in 3 of these instances for these papers of Jaworski's own hand describing these, they're double-spaced rough drafts. So it's possible that he didn't realize his secretary was keeping the rough draft. And that when he cleaned out his files, he got rid of the final memo, because that's never surfaced, but didn't think to get rid of the rough drafts. Now, interestingly, and then I'll finish, I'm almost through there. Jaworski resigns. The cover-up trial jury gets sequestered early in October. It's going to be a 3-month trial, but they get sequestered early in October. And the moment that happens, Jaworski announces his departure, goes back to Texas. And the first interview he gives is to Bob Woodward on December 5th, 1974. We have Woodward's notes because he typed up his notes. He gave them to the University of Texas, sold them to the University of Texas. And on the top page, the second sentence of Woodward's typed notes says there were lots of one-on-one conversations that nobody knows about except he and the other party. And that's a very strange thing to have told a reporter, an investigative reporter, who must have been congratulating him on the fine job he did as special prosecutor. And he says, well, there's a whole bunch of conversations, secret conversations with this other person nobody knows about. Who could it have been? What important person was omitted from the scenario? Well, the only possibility is Judge Sirica, because now we know there were at least 10 conversations with Sirica. So you could almost say that Jaworski was begging for this to come out 50 years ago. But Woodward didn't follow up on it because that would have ruined the narrative. That would have undercut what they wanted, which was Nixon and his people are all bad all the time. Immediately after that, in these same sets of notes, there's a paragraph where Jaworski says, you know, the House Judiciary Committee and they're fine people, but they couldn't conduct an investigation like we could. So we helped them. We actually staffed them. We provided a roadmap to enable them to nail Nixon. Well, that was secret too, until about 2018, that the special prosecutors staffed the House Judiciary Committee. Now, I'm not an expert on today. We know there's big troubles today, but I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think the founding fathers thought that the executive branch, people working for the president, would be the ones to provide the staffing to the legislative branch so they could impeach him. I mean, it doesn't make sense. That's why they kept it secret. That's why that was all done. But here's Jaworski telling Woodward. And again, Woodward doesn't follow up. So let me finish on this particular topic with two other revelations. Okay, I'm sitting on batches of documents that challenge everything, but there are two other very significant revelations. The first has to do with Deep Throat. The supposed source for Woodward and Bernstein's stories. He only met with Woodward, but Woodward's stories that they nicknamed Deep Throat, which name was picked just for their book to make their book more exciting, not referred to during the time. And then it's made into a movie. And of course, we have Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman playing Woodward and Bernstein. In the movie, it is very clear that Deep Throat, whose identity has never been known until relatively recently, but it's very clear from the movie that Deep Throat is a member of Nixon's White House staff. It doesn't come right out and say it, but it shows it in the movie. And if your viewers have watched the movie recently, they're hanging out on the steps of the Library of Congress, Woodward and Bernstein, and they've run out of leads. They're dead in the water. And Woodward says, I have a friend on the White House staff. And suddenly they're back in it. Their pipeline is reopened. They're cutting stories. Then there comes this scene where Woodward calls Deep Throat at the office. And Deep Throat says, don't ever call me here again. And he's talking to him from a phone booth. Remember, phone booths. And the phone booth is placed right across the street from the old executive office building, which is part of the White House compound. And he's looking up at the old EOB when he talks to Deep Throat, who's obviously inside. And then finally, Deep Throat is going to go deliver papers. This is one of the midnight meetings in the garage. And there's this shot, it's eerie, of Hal Holbrook, who's playing Deep Throat. It's kind of at night, the floorboards shooting up into his face as he pulls out of the northwest gate of the White House. Well, turns out Deep Throat is not a member of Nixon's White House staff. But that is kept secret from the American public by the deliberate action of Bob Woodward for 30 years. For 30 years, he allows the American public, encourages them to believe there was somebody on Nixon's staff who was so disgusted by the criminality that he started leaking. I mean, a clear misdirection to the American public. And the other has to do with the smoking gun. The smoking gun is the tape of June 23rd, 1972, where Bob Haldeman comes in and says, the FBI is looking into the money, they're tracing the money, and they're going to trace it in a direction we don't want it to go. And the way we figured to do this, to stop this, is to get the CIA to tell the FBI not to interview certain people. When that tape was heard by Nixon's lawyers, and I was the third one to hear the tape, I transcribed it, I'm the one that named it the smoking gun, we misunderstood the context. He wasn't trying to stop the Watergate investigation. What had happened was the money that was found on the burglars had come from Creep, open and shut. That wasn't any problem at all. But it got to Creep from two prominent Democrats who had donated to Nixon under absolute assurance their names would never become public.
Hmm.
So when the FBI wanted to interview them, the worry was they would be outed. And this fix was just to prevent those two from being interviewed. Okay, misunderstood by the lawyers, causes Nixon's immediate resignation, but he was on the ropes anyway because of the roadmap and the misrepresentations about making the payoff to Howard Hunt. John Dean is the one who came up with the idea of using the CIA to tell the FBI to not interview these two people. He's talked about on the tape. No question John Dean knew. He's asked about it at the trial, at the cover-up trial. Bob Haldeman's freedom is hanging by a thread, and his lawyer says to Dean, wasn't that a political decision to protect the donors? And Dean says, well, they were worried because Gordon Liddy was involved. Now, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. He doesn't lie, you understand. He doesn't lie. But when you're a witness in a trial, you swear you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. He doesn't tell the full truth until 2014 in a book that he publishes called The Nixon Defense, in a footnote at page 55, where he says, you know, it's the funniest thing. That smoking gun tape has been misunderstood all along, and it really has nothing to do with Watergate, and there was nothing wrong behind it. And if the lawyers had known, Nixon might have lived, and I'm quoting, might have lived to fight again another day. In short, the smoking gun was shooting blanks. Well, again, this is 45 years after Nixon has left office. John Dean's known all along that this was misunderstood, and he stands mute. So between Deep Throat's real identity, the real understanding of the smoking gun, you've got the American public misled, deliberately misled, and then out come my batches of documents that I rattle on, David, but I'm having such a good time.
No, that's fine.
What difference does it make today? Well, it shows the Age didn't get a fair trial, and Nixon was not treated fairly either. The Department of Justice, in the person of the Attorney General who started under Jerry Ford, Ed Levy, he decided that too many of the Justice Department lawyers had not behaved ethically. So one of the reforms was he established a unit within the Department of Justice whose only job is to investigate allegations of misconduct by Department of Justice attorneys. They have such latitude and such discretion. They can ruin people if they choose to. They can indict on weak evidence. They can pass over all kinds of stuff. So he set up this unit called the Office of Professional Responsibility, exists to this day, whose only job is to investigate allegations of misconduct by Department of Justice attorneys. Now, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force operated with total independence from the Department of Justice, but they were still legally Department of Justice attorneys. And I learned about the existence of this unit last October. You would think I might have come across it before that, but I live my own life. And that very day, I filed a complaint of attorney misconduct against the Watergate Special Prosecution lawyers who had done all these things that I have uncovered in the last 8 years. And it was an electronic filing. You don't get the same flexibility, but they say, thank you. We will launch an investigation. We will give you a written report. It's going to take us a while, so don't expect to hear from us from 8 to 10 weeks from now, but we'll get back to you. So then I sent my 3 books. I sent follow-up letters. And I said, look, don't be telling me this is too long ago, because there's no statute of limitations on ethical violations by justice attorneys. And don't be telling me you can't reconstruct or it's not significant, because these are the same people who took their files with them to prevent finding this wrongdoing. And don't say, oh, they're probably all gone, because not a couple months ago, 17 of them signed a op-ed piece, an essay calling on Trump to be impeached. And they talked about what they had done since they were special prosecutors. So they're around. And then and I begged in the letters, please let me come down. Let me explain. This is so complex. And there's so many corners that were cut by the prosecutors. And you've got the ability to investigate that I don't. So let me come explain, and then, you're on your own, we'll take it. I've now filed the original filing and 8 follow-up letters, and they're all posted on my website. Now, my website, which is www.shepardonwatergate.com, is different from other people's. Mine is designed to help students, researchers, scholars to better understand Watergate by having access to the documents I've uncovered. Mm-hmm. So I've written 3 books. They each in turn talks about different documents. But what I posted on the website are the links to those actual documents. Mm-hmm. So they're in the back of 2 of the books in the appendix. One is just, I just, because of electronics, I just cited all the reference documents on the website. But so is this complaint of attorney misconduct. If you go on the website, there's an incredible amount of knowledge, because I think the best way to turn understanding of what happened, of Watergate, to recognize these documents that have surfaced, is to make them widely available. So 2 weeks ago, Friday, the 17th of June, is the 50th anniversary of the break-in. They got caught, they got arrested. And there were all kinds of documentaries and programs and discussions about what was going on. But in none of them was I included, because what I know and what I can talk about is so disruptive. It interferes with the narrative that it was all Nixon, all his people, all bad all the time. Except for one program. I got to go on C-SPAN on that Friday morning, and they paired me with a former special prosecutor. But the format was just a discussion of 3 people around the table. No documents, no notes, no PowerPoint slides. So when I would say something, the prosecutor would just deny that that was true. No, there were no ex parte meetings. No, the case against Chuck Colson was very strong. It wasn't weak. No, Dean didn't hire Liddy. And I'd say, well, I got the documents. You go on my website, you can find them, but it's not very persuasive. But then Friday, 4 days ago, I gave a presentation to the National Archives. It was a virtual presentation, Zoom call, just like this. And since the archives has most of those documents, what I did with that presentation was pick a little bit over a dozen of the key documents, display them, go into some detail in what they provided, and show the viewers what was going on. Now, who wants to spend time doing that when there's so many more things you can do and worry about? But I believe we're watching today something similar to what we saw 50 years ago. I think it was Mark Twain who said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And what we had back then, which I think I can show, is representatives of all three branches of government, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, supported by a complacent media, secretly linked arms to drive Nixon from office. So we know today that the chief counsel of the Senate Ervin Committee met frequently with Judge Sirica. They were both professors at Georgetown Law School, and he would go down and talk to Sirica. That's not supposed to happen, but that is what happened.
Yeah.
The prosecutors talked with Sirica. That's not supposed to happen, but it did happen. The prosecutors supplied information on the sly to the House Judiciary Committee that we didn't know about, we weren't allowed to challenge. I suspect they were in close touch with the Ervin Committee. There are memos that suggest they jointly interview witnesses, the Ervin Committee and the prosecutors. And there are suggestions that at least two special prosecutors be assigned to monitor the Ervin hearings because they wanted that information. And of course, you have Judge Sirica calling for the creation of the Senate Ervin Committee and approving the transfer of grand jury information gathered under law for criminal prosecutions to be sent to the Congress to be used for political purposes. Now, what's happening today? Well, you have a committee, it's a House Select Committee, the J6 Committee, and it's not, the Republicans don't have a Republican representation. There's two people who don't like Trump and they really like what's going on. And the Republican Party has said these people don't speak for us. So it's a very, very one-sided hearing. They're conducting what could be called a legislative trial. Okay. This isn't examining stuff for future legislation. This is a legislative trial, just like the Ervin Committee conducted. Now, what's so interesting is the Bill of Rights, the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. Speedy public trial. The government has to put on their case first. Their witnesses have to be under oath. You get to cross-examine. None of that applies in a legislative trial. You're dragged in. You can't avoid it. You're the only one in the room that's under oath. They pepper you with questions. Their job is to try to embarrass you. You can't put on your own evidence or your own witnesses. And they're doing it for the publicity in an attempt, maybe successful, maybe not, in an attempt to convince the American public of their point of view. Now, compare the Trump impeachments, which were fought by the Republican Party. So you have a hearing in the Judiciary Committee and you get 5 minutes of pro-impeachment diatribe, and then you switch and you get 5 minutes of anti-impeachment diatribe. And it's perfectly clear this is partisan as it can be. There's no universal agreement, and you can pick who you want to believe, but it isn't calm and it isn't serene. But then you flash to the J6 committee, all very calm. There's no dissent, and the American public is being fed one side. Now, what's different today from 50 years ago is we have diversity of the press. We have podcasts, we have essays, we've got conservative points of view. We still have mainstream media. It still sings out of the same songbook. It's always the same answer, same tune, same narrative, but you can find dissent and different points of view if you want to look. They don't agree. They can't both be right. Pick your side. But 50 years ago, there was only one side. There was only one narrative. And if you had a different point of view, you just didn't get hurt. Remember, there were 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. there were two prominent newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, and there were two dominant news magazines, Time and Newsweek. And they were all singing out of the same hymnal too back then. But there was no Fox News, no Newsmax, no podcasts, no David Gornoski show. So it was one point of view repeated endlessly. I'm almost through with my diatribe. The American public that knows about Watergate, oh, I know all about it. They know from three things. They know from the Watergate hearings, which were all serene, all bipartisan. There was no dispute because nobody was defending Nixon in those hearings. They know from the movie, All the President's Men, which was as one-sided as it can be. And they know from this play by Peter Morgan that was made into a very, very popular movie called Frost Nixon. And I don't know if you saw it, but there's this actor named Frank Langella, and he plays Nixon, and he looks like Nixon.
Yeah.
Now, you could go get the original Frost Nixon interviews. And when it comes right down to the moment, he says, you know, this is really your fault. You're a participant. Nixon says, no, that's not true. There was no intent to interfere with the investigation. I was not involved in the cover-up. But when you see Frank Langella in the movie, you get 24 TV screens all linked together, and you see Frank, and he's got sweat on his upper lip, and he's worried, and he confesses, yes, I did that. So the American public, more recently than Watergate, I think this was in the 1990s, maybe after the turn of the century, they've seen Nixon confess.
Yeah.
And here I come along and I say, you know, you got it all wrong. You just got it all wrong. But they won't include me in their programs, you know, all these documentaries. And I don't get to play because I'm as welcome as a illegitimate child at a family reunion. You know, you foul up our narrative. We don't want you here. So that's what.
Yeah, that movie Frost Nixon. Let me see when that came out. That came out just recently, 2008.
Yeah, well, see, there you have it. Time flies.
Why do you think? All right, so I want to get to more of the big picture things. Why do you think that they have such a obsession with scapegoating him? What did he do? I've heard that it was the war hawks, that he was doing stuff, you know, normalizing relationships with China
David, he pissed everybody off.
Why? Because he wasn't part of the DC establishment, right?
Well, let's go way back to 1946. He comes back from the war. He was in the Navy in the Pacific. He gets elected to Congress. He beats Jerry Voorhees, a 5-term incumbent who was elected the most popular congressman by the media in that era. So who's this guy, Dick Nixon, who bumps off our favorite guy? Then he goes on the House Un-American Activities Committee. He's a lawyer. And he takes down Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss is Harvard. He is the epitome of the elites. He's the protege of Felix Frankfurter. He clerks for Oliver Wendell Holmes. He is everything the Eastern liberal establishment wanted to be. And he just happened to have been a communist in the 1930s. Now, you know, your listeners won't really identify with this, but in the midst of the Depression, with capitalism being seen as having failed, it was not uncommon for liberals to think maybe communism was a better way. Okay, the Philby Five in England, same thing. Lots and lots of students at Oxford and Cambridge thought, you know, maybe our way of life isn't the right way of life. Well, Alger Hiss was among them. But then it, you know, with Stalin and the killings and everything else, it comes into some disrepute. So he's called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he denies having been a communist, and Nixon hunts him down. And he gets him on perjury. The statute of limitations had passed a long time before. They couldn't have convicted Hiss of having been a communist in the 1930s, but they did convict him of perjury. And the liberal Eastern establishment never forgave Dick Nixon from then on. Then in 1950, he knocks off Helen Gahagan Douglas to win the Senate. And she's a movie star. She's a Hollywood movie star. So he turns all of Hollywood against. She called him Tricky Dick. He said she was pink down to her underwear. I mean, it was one of these typically vicious campaigns. He's then the partisan for Eisenhower. Eisenhower doesn't dirty his hands on partisan stuff. So in 1968, well, in 1960, he loses to Jack Kennedy, which only seems right because Jack Kennedy is everything everybody wants to be. He's rich, he's handsome, he's got a beautiful wife, and we all remember his presidency as Camelot. But so Nixon loses, comes back in 68 and barely beats Hubert Humphrey in a very, very close election. But the Democrats say, well, but for the war and the protests and all that ugly stuff in Chicago and the convention, Nixon would never have won. He's not Ivy League educated. He's an outsider. Nixon comes into office in 1968, opposed by every institution in our nation's capital. The Congress is 2/3 against him. The congressional staff is against him. The federal bureaucracy, we didn't call it the deep state, but to a person, they're against him. There are no Republican law firms. There's no Republican think tanks. And the media hates him, just uniformly hates him.
What about his White House staff?
Well, he brings his White House staff, but he has trouble getting any of his people confirmed.
I've heard that before.
I mean, yeah, but look at it from.
That's what happened to Trump. How does this work? It seems like there's a whole sausage.
Well, it's very, very similar. Now, both of them come in opposed by every institution. Both are thin-skinned. Both have surprisingly successful first terms. Both take on the press frontally. I mean, there's no way to avoid it. They got great differences too. Nixon is a lifelong established politician. Trump is a successful entrepreneur. But both are thin-skinned. Nixon rages in private, Trump rages in public. It really is interesting. Switch again to today. The Irvin Committee was trying to undo an election that had passed. So were the prosecutors. I mean, they may not phrase it that way, but Nixon had already won. Today, I think what they're trying to do is to prevent a tsunami that's coming in 2022 and 2024. They're trying to head off a wipeout. And of course, there's every indication there's going to be a wipeout. And so they don't have the luxury of time. The J6 committee can't have all summer to do their hearings if they're going to turn public opinion. They got to hit the ground running. They got to have dramatic hearings right away.
Well, they hired an ABC, a retired news executive. Did you see that ABC TV executive? They hired him.
Well, I confess, David, I really don't follow it.
That's what I'm saying. The January 6th.
My heart's not up to it.
Yeah, the January 6th committee hired an ABC TV news executive to produce their hearings on the television.
Well, they've hired former federal prosecutors. They're conducting a legislative trial, a one-sided legislative trial. Supposedly, they've interviewed 1,000 people. Yeah. Now you go back to the special prosecutor. Some of the, sometimes it's legislative, sometimes it's executive. The special prosecutors 50 years ago investigated all the people who had given money to the Republican campaign. They even went back to the off-year campaign in 1970. and they sent IRS agents and FBI agents to interview 150 Republican donors. And of course, it scared the bejesus out of them. I mean, if giving to a candidate's going to get me an audit, I don't want any part of it. The other thing they did, and all this comes out later, but they did it, they investigated every single potential candidate for president in 1976, every Republican. Jerry Ford, was vice president and then elevated. And there was huge investigation into Ford's background because he needed to be confirmed by both the House and the Senate. Had nothing to do with Watergate, but the special prosecutors got that FBI investigation and leaked stuff during Ford's campaign. Ford's original vice president was Nelson Rockefeller. Pretty wealthy guy, pretty clean guy, member of the Eastern establishment. They investigated Nelson Rockefeller. Now, when Ford ran for election, he's not running for re-election because he's never been elected. He's running for election in 1976, and he chose to use Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole of Kansas. Well, I'll be a son of a gun. They investigate Bob Dole, and they leak stuff about Bob Dole during the campaign. And then there's John Connally. John Connally, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, 4-term governor of Texas, but he converts because of his respect for Nixon to become a Nixon Republican, Secretary of Treasury. They investigate John Connally. They actually indict him. And then finally, there's Ronald Reagan. Now, you couldn't find a prominent person who was less connected with Watergate. He's 3,000 miles away in California. And there's no file on Governor Reagan in the prosecutor's files, but there's this memo, and I came across it and I put it on my website. And it's to Jaworski, and it says, just to follow up on what we were talking about in the hallway, here's where we stand on Reagan. Here's where we stand on our investigation of Ronald Reagan. And you sit there and say, this is not possible. You can't do that. Again, prosecutors have incredible discretion. And if they exercise it politically, they need to be called to account. They did it in secret, and my work and my complaints are calling it into account.
So if your work shows that Nixon was not guilty of any of the crimes that were alleged about him, right?
Well, let me put it another way if I could. Nixon was never brought to trial. So guilt means found by a jury of your peers after
Sure.
full trial. There were no trial. He was not legally impeached. The House Judiciary Committee recommended his impeachment, but the House, Nixon resigned before the House did it. Now, it was a certainty he was going to be impeached. Whether he would have been convicted by the Senate is open to some debate. In the entire founding of our nation, the Senate has never convicted a president. So you could sit there and you could argue about that. Here's what Pat Moynihan said, and I think Pat's got his finger right on the situation. In the middle of Watergate, he was ambassador to India, and I knew him because he was on Nixon's staff to begin with. And he was walking me after dinner back to my hotel in India, in New Delhi. And he said, Geoff, this business we're in, this business of politics, it attracts some very intense people, dangerous people. And you can't keep them out because we exist on volunteers. The question is, what do you do when it first occurs to you that you have a nut on your side? And that's where we miss. That's where we let the American people down. Now, the nut's Gordon Liddy. Now, to some, he's a hero of the far right. I knew him. I knew him at Treasury. I knew him when I was a White House fellow. I knew him on the White House staff. Crazy as a look. A criminal mind. The plan, the intelligence plan that he concocted. Mugging, bugging, kidnapping, prostitution. Incredible stuff. He was recruited by John Dean. John Dean is like Victor Frankenstein. John Dean created a monster, put him in charge of a campaign intelligence plan. Let me interrupt. Everybody has a campaign intelligence plan. Today it's called opposition research. Well, John Durham is investigating how some people get carried away trying to ruin the other side. Well, Liddy got carried away and came up with these harebrained schemes that were just so illegal, it was embarrassing. Having created Liddy and empowering him to come up with a plan, John Dean couldn't turn him off. There was arguments about the size of his budget, but nobody, after he'd been hired, nobody knew what he had in mind. Nobody could had the authority or the necessity to go say, Gordon, get out of here. We don't want anything to do with that. They just kept pushing him to the side, but he was the Energizer Bunny. He would never stop working on it. And it blows up on our face. It's never been shown that Nixon or Haldeman or Ehrlichman had any idea of the break-in or the specifics of Gordon's plan when the break-in occurred. But John Dean did. And John Dean believed his job was to protect the Nixon administration from this scandal. And to John Dean, there was no distinction between the people on the White House staff and the people on the campaign to reelect the president. Huge distinction to me, because I was on the White House staff, and the guys at the campaign, the reelection campaign, they were guilty as hell. They were in real trouble because some, not everybody, but they knew about the plans. They knew what Liddy was up to. But nobody in the White House staff did until John Dean started his cover-up, and then he infected everybody. And then when it failed, and it should have failed, 9 months of cover-up, Dean runs to the prosecutors and says there was a cover-up and they were all in it. I played a minor role, but they were all in it. And I'm the only one who can testify as to their involvement. You got to give me immunity so I can testify against my former colleagues. Now, he first runs to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the career prosecutors. They hear him out. There are 12 meetings or telephone conversations with Dean or his lawyer over the month of April, 12. And at the end, they say no immunity. You've been downplaying your own role, and you're too involved. You're too much of an instigator for us to let you go. So his lawyer, who's a politically connected Democrat, goes to the Irvin Committee on the Hill. And it's the Irvin Committee who's looking for dramatic witnesses on their hearings, and they give Dean immunity. He becomes their star witness. They got so much invested in him, they have to make him appear to be uninvolved, appear to be an innocent whistleblower. But he's the guy, he's the one who recruited Gordon Liddy. He's the one who was at the meetings where his plan was described. He's the one who's the desk officer of the cover-up. On that CNN documentary from 2 weeks ago, he says, he admits he was the desk officer. Everything went through Dean. And then he pretends, oh, I decided this had to stop. Well, he came running in because the cover-up was coming down around his ears. And then a final comment, and I'll go to your questions. Dean didn't make a credible witness because he was so involved. So the first case to come to trial came to trial in New York, where John Mitchell and Maurice Stans, two cabinet officers, were indicted for political payoff. Dean was the principal witness, and they were acquitted, flat, cold acquitted. And in the interviews of the jury afterwards, they said, we didn't believe John Dean. We didn't find he was credible. So good old Judge Sirica down in Washington, D.C. says, boy, I don't want that to happen in the cover-up trial. I want Dean to have credibility. So I'm going to call him in. He's already pled guilty to a single count. He chose to become state's evidence, lead prosecution witness. And I'm going to throw the book at him. I'm going to sentence him to 1 to 4 years in prison, the longest sentence up until that time. Okay. So, and incarceration is going to start the first day of trial. So when he testifies, he's testifying from prison, looking at a really long sentence. And the thrust of his testimony is, I've been published, I've been punished. We were all in on it together. These guys should be punished too. These are my colleagues. Let me tell you what they did. Well, then 1 week, and everybody, and the top people get convicted on all counts, Mitchell and Haldeman and Ehrlichman, all counts, 3-month trial. Then a week after the trial, Sirica reduces Dean's sentence to time served. So he's only been technically incarcerated for less than 4 months, but the jury and the American public is told, no, 1 to 4 years, this guy, they threw the book at this guy, and then they let him go. And then it turns out he never spent a night in jail, not a single night in jail. He spent his time in an army barracks at Fort Holabird, Maryland, which is, it's not prison. Now, you're confined at night. During the day, he's driven down to the prosecutor's offices where he works on his book. And he said to people, when he brags about the fact he never spent a night in prison, he says, pretty tough time, don't you think? And the implication is, I didn't really do anything wrong. See, I testified for the government. I'm one of the good guys. But he did everything. He's the centerpiece of the wrongdoing.
What would you think? What do you think Nixon would think if he read your book?
Well, I got 3 books.
The latest one we're talking about,
I
the
think-
Nixon conspiracy.
Okay, I think Nixon and Haldeman and Ehrlichman and John Mitchell and Chuck Colson would say, now I see what happened. Now I see how they did it. Thank heavens you discovered the paper trail. I mean, Nixon went to his grave in 1994.
You think Nixon would say this was 50 years too late?
Well, you know, politics is a tough
Yeah.
game. Tip O'Neill said it ain't patty cake. Nixon swam with the sharks. He knew it was a tough game. But I don't think in his wildest imagination, he would think the prosecutors and the judge and the Hill could do what they did to him, to drive him from office through falsehood, secret falsehoods and misrepresentations, and then deny any semblance of a fair trial to his
I
colleagues.
still want to know why they did it. Is it because of but you don't have an answer or speculation about that?
Well, Nixon represented the other side. Why do people hate Trump? I mean, boy, do they hate Trump. There are lots of
They would never
people-
do. They treat some people a little bit worse than others on that side. So I think it's something
Well,
they
Nixon-
do. You know.
Nixon was, it would be interesting if we could go back. Nixon may have been hated more than Trump by the time he resigned. It was a vicious time. Go back to the war, David, just for a second. Most divisive war, not counting the Civil War, most divisive war in our nation's history. Now, there's a 10-year group of men, only men, because they were subject to the draft. I was one of them, where every decision you made about life keyed off your draft status. Did you get a D in a course in school? Well, you might lose your deferment. You take a summer off. It got later where they needed more people. Were you married? And then being married wasn't good enough. You had to have had a kid. And every man knew, and mother and cousins and girlfriends, if you got drafted, you were going to Vietnam. And if you went to Vietnam, you're going to die. And that tends to motivate people. You know, we had the Weather Underground, the Symbionese Liberation Army. the massive, massive protests in the streets. And these people were serious. They didn't get so upset about Lyndon. They prevented him from running for his second election. But when Nixon became president, there were 537,000 US troops in Vietnam. I mean, roll that number around. And Nixon starts bringing them home, but not fast enough. And then you said, it wasn't the military who disliked Nixon. Well, he and this crazy Harvard professor named Henry Kissinger were having uncleared conversations in secret with the two countries that were mortal enemies of the United States, with Russia and China. He was announcing troop withdrawals that the Joint Chiefs hadn't cleared. So they actually set up a spy ring in the White House to spy on the president. So he had the special prosecutors after him. He had the Irvin Committee after him. He had a spy ring after him. The day after Nixon was reelected, he called a cabinet meeting and he congratulated people on their hard work to get him reelected. And then he left the room, and Bob Haldeman said, "We want a letter of resignation from every single political appointee in every one of your departments, because we're going to restaff and we're not sure how many people we're going to carry over." So everybody had to write an undated letter of resignation. I did too. But I was on the White House staff. I was assured there was going to be an opportunity for promotion for me. I mean, I was as loyal as they could be. But that act upset Nixon's loyalists. Then in running for re-election, he was going to win by a landslide, but they spent their time and effort in running up Nixon's numbers, not in helping elect other Republican candidates for the House or the Senate. So he didn't have coattails. And all of the Republicans and senators up on the Hill who are still in the minority are pissed because Nixon didn't help as much as they thought he could have. So he's upset everybody in the city on the day after his reelection. And then when he needs friends, and then even one of the prosecutors on NPR said afterwards, he said, Nixon got into some trouble, but when he got into the trouble, he didn't have the goodwill of people in the city to help him to weather that trouble. Odd time, David, odd time. Go to Trump for just a second. Let's go out on the thin ice. For conservatives, for Republicans, for believers in reoriented the government balance against private enterprise, Trump had a amazingly successful first term, but a divisive guy. Not a team player at all. One guy all the time, erratic. And there's lots of people, some are Trump's friends, some aren't, who say if he could let go, if he could move on, he could be a major player. That really don't want him on the ballot again, but he could be a major player and help us to gain a incredible majority, given how bad things are and given how fairly clear it is that this administration is causing them. Where are you on that stuff, David?
I think that I think Trump wants revenge, and I think that he's not going to settle for anything less than whatever he can get in that direction. So,
remember what they say about revenge.
Yeah,
it's a dish best served cold.
Well, sir, I really appreciate your time, and I want people to go to your website to check out your work. ShepardOnWatergate.com is your website where you can.
Yes, indeed. And that's where all the documents are. That's where all the background is. I'd like you to buy my book, but you can, they're links on the website to enable you to do that. Thank you for having me, David.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Take care.